Well, welcome everyone. My name is Gregor Murray, and I'm the moderator for this event, which we've labeled Making Work Better. It's a joint initiative of the European Trade Union Institute and the CRIMT Partnership on Experimentation for Better Work. And we produced a thematic issue of the journal Transfer, European Labor and Research Review, in 2023. And we thought it might be a nice idea to bring together the authors of those articles because it seemed so relevant to our thinking about the quality of work, of how to make work better, and so on. Now, Transfer is the quarterly peer-reviewed scientific journal of the research department of the European Trade Union Institute. And CRIMT Partnership on Experimentation for Better Work has brought together an international network of research centers and other researchers to think about how to make work better through various forms of experimentation. And so in 2020, we did a thematic issue on experimentation in the journal Transfer. Then in 2023, we've done this series of case studies on making work better. And that's what we want to bring you today. Now, Transfer is a great review. We have several of the key people here with us, the managing editor, Marina Luttrell. Normally we would have Vera Sepanovic, Martin Kuhn, Philippe Pachet, who I know is here, and Bart Van Herk, who will be here. So that's the editorial team, and we really want to thank them for welcoming us as the CRIMT Partnership to use the journal to make these various contributions. We have all of the authors of 7 articles which featured in this special issue. And the special issue, and I'll just repeat here, you're in the CRIMT Partnership ETUI seminar on making work better. We started from the premise that better work makes for better societies. Now, there's a little trick here that our good friend Harry Arthurs in Canada, who has a perverse but very quick logic, who says, are you sure that it's not better societies that make for better work? And of course, we weren't sure. There's a reverse causality there, which can work in both directions. But we are convinced that if you have worse work, you definitely have worse societies, and you need to work on both poles. And I think that several of you are going to speak to this. So we wanted to take this up in the introduction to the special issue of Transfer, and to explore what makes work better or worse and how it can be improved. Now, as a wide variety of experiments shape our economies and communities, a key challenge is to engage in shared learning about these processes in order to stimulate a dialogue between the aspiration for better work and the conditions likely to facilitate or hinder making work better. It's an invitation to move beyond narrow conceptions of job quality to a broader lens about how actors in the world of work strategize, innovate, incorporate uncertainty into their search for sustainable solutions for better work. So key themes will include today why work needs to be better, but is often worse, why better work makes for better societies, how work can be made better, the role of institutions in achieving better work, and finally, and critically, how union strategies are essential to processes of experimentation to make work better. And what we've tried to do is to build in these various articles to answer some of these questions. And I think that the authors will clearly be picking up what we're suggesting. Now, by better work, we mean productive, innovative, healthy, inclusive, and meaningful work where individuals exercise some degree of control and autonomy over their working lives and are free from undue uncertainty and risk to their health and well-being. Better work also entails economic democracy and citizenship as part of a sustainable and solidaristic vision of prosperity for all citizens and future generations. And better work relates to both the conditions of the work experience and the employment status and labor rights that come with it. However, the problem is that a very different picture emerges from the current era, and a number of you will speak to that because the discussion on better work is very often after decades of neoliberal experimentation, and as COVID put clearly into view, one of worse work. And that's what we're trying to address. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide the discussion into two rounds. A first one where people make a link between their article, their contribution, and this set of thinking about better work. And in the second round, we're asking the same authors to say, okay, well, what's one strategy that I can take away from my contribution or from my other research that helps us to move the better work agenda forward? So you can see that what we're trying to do is something both highlighting the contributions that the authors have made, but also drawing out some very practical implications. And we'll be continuing this in further publications. And after the seminar, for those who signed up, we'll be sending you some links that you can use and activate to follow this discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to go into the first round. And this first round, as I mentioned, is about how to make work better. The contributions that people have made. It's why quality of work or making work better is so important. And before we go into the actual contributions, we wanted to have a specific contribution from the European Trade Union Institute. And we have with us Agnieszka Piasna, who I think that we'll call Agnieszka the ETUI specialist on quality of work. And before I ask you, Agnieszka, to go into the how you wanted to develop your thinking on this issue, I just want to ask you, how did you come to focus? And I realize that you do a lot of different things, but how did you come to focus so much of your work on the quality of work?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think it's the answer is simple because it's so important. So I started looking at working conditions through the perspective of working time, work effort, but it all really should be considered jointly. No, different dimensions interact with each other, and the quality of work impacts so many other things. So it just not only impacts how we experience work, why we spend those, let's say, 8 hours on the workplace, but it extends into experiences with the private life, decisions about private life, about the life satisfaction. Then you said the better society. Indeed, the democracy at work translates into democracy in the society. So it is crucial. It is really the essence, as I would say, from the worker's perspective of how good or bad the job is that they have.
And can I just ask you, at the ETUI, beyond the trade union world, which the ETUI researches and with which it works, is there a receptive audience for quality of work, or is it like, I'm trying to look for the expression, apple pie and ice cream, we'll say in North America, that yeah, but it's not actually taken that seriously?
Well, that depends on the period, right? In the past crisis, the post-financial crisis, the job quality was considered an obstacle to recovery. So if it was of interest, perhaps on the policy level, within the European Union at least, it was how to, well, squeeze it a bit, lower the standards so that work becomes cheaper and then recovery is faster. So for some time, their interest was negative. But then, yes, the audiences are receptive, I would say. I think the consciousness or awareness of the importance of the quality of work has spread. Employers are able to quantify, that's what they want, right? They want to calculate how expensive it is for them to have poor quality of work with people in burnout or in sick leaves? Or is it perhaps better to have good quality of work, how far it takes them in terms of recruitment, in terms of the good image of the company, corporate social responsibility? So well, at least it's not the negative interest, I would say now, but there's still a long way, and perhaps we'll talk about this today, from the interest or being aware of the issue of job quality to then actually acting on it in a way that gives us the good outcomes or the outcomes we would like to see.
So I'm going to go over to the main question, Agnieszka, but I just want to remind all of the participants in this webinar that the webinar is the ETUI CRIMT Partnership webinar on making work better. We have hundreds of participants signed up from more than 50 countries, which generates the interest to this. And it's going to be difficult to take questions from the webinar participants, but you can use the chat to formulate comments or questions. And we have someone who's going to be, Nicola, who's going to be bringing those together and relaying it when it's a question. So just so everyone knows how they can participate in direct comments to the speakers. So Agnieszka, over to you. Why does better work need to be at the center of our thinking about job quality?
Oh, thank you. So first of all, the better work should be at the center of our thinking, period, right? It is crucial. It is important to understand, first of all, from the reasons I mentioned, because of the impact on individuals, on the society, but also because we are living in the time of so many transformations and changes to the world of work. You mentioned them in the publication, so ranging from the digitalization, AI, financialization of the economy, individualization of the employment relationship, and so on and so on. There's just so many transformations going on, and they're developing in parallel, so that the outcomes in terms of work, the quality of work are immense and not always obvious. So we should definitely look at the consequences of those transformations. Now, whether how to approach this, whether it's job quality, better work, and how do we frame this discussion? I would like to make 3 points. And the first point is that the starting point, the very useful starting point, is the job quality. Now, what do we mean by job quality? These are the characteristics of working conditions, of employment conditions of a certain job. So we really focus on what is provided as a working and employment environment, how the work is organized, what the workplace in terms of social and physical relations, what it looks like. And that gives us a basic understanding of good and bad features of a job. Now, why I think this is really important as a basic starting point, because when we focus on a job, we don't relativize it to who has this job, who performs this, whether the person is young or old, whether it's a woman or man. We just really focus on the job and what this provides. It allows us to engage in all the debates of deregulation or emergence of new forms of work that sometimes are promoted on the grounds of fitting certain needs of individuals. So the justification of many of the regulatory policies that we observed was that some people at some stages of their life can get away with having a bad job. That was the premise behind the regulation in the 90s, for instance, bringing women into the labor market or some marginalized groups. Now it's the same with the gig economy. Well, there are workers who find it difficult to access good quality employment. Let's offer them gig work. Or the arguments or the debates such as precarious employment. So for instance, having a short hour job stacked up with another poor quality short hour job, does that alleviate precariousness, or actually having 2 poor quality precarious jobs traps a person in precarious cycle of work? So I think job quality is a very good starting point to think about a job, what the job conveys, and putting other considerations, so to say, as a in the background. So once we develop a good understanding what the job offers, irrespective of who holds it or in which context it's performed, then a second point, These are the transformations I mentioned, and this is exactly what the issue of transfer is covering such wonderfully. Labor market is changing, the world of work is changing, so we need to adapt our thinking or in measurement of job quality to the changing circumstances, so that we are sure that we are still capturing the essence, the key characteristics of work, because they are not static. The job quality framework was also developed very much in relation to the employer. The responsibility for providing good quality employment was on the employer, was the other side of the equation. Now we have situations where this relationship is blurred, is hazy. We very well explained it in many of the contributions to the special issue. You have blurring of the boundary of the employment, blurring of the time, which is private, which is paid employment, of the place of work. Place of living becomes the place of work for many workers. Tools, whether it's a walkthrough or your private property, risks are also individualized. So many, especially in the freelance gig kind of work, precarious employment environments, many of those categories don't necessarily apply from the standard employment relationship. So we need to adapt, we need to be in dialogue with the transformations that are ongoing to still be able meaningfully assess how good is this paid activity, how good or bad, right? So what are the qualitative features of that? And that brings me to the last point I would like to make. So I mentioned the challenges, the ongoing transformations in the society, and they create particular challenges, such as the climate crisis, for instance, creates a challenge of work being sustainable. So that brings us to the different level of evaluating whether a job is good or bad. It's more a societal level, it's more normative evaluation, not vis-a-vis a worker performing that job necessarily, but towards wider society, whether this type of job that we create, they contribute to our broader goals of having sustainable, ethical, inclusive, and so on labor markets. But what I would argue is very useful to structure our thinking from this core of job quality and then adding or expanding the horizon without putting one of them to the side or saying that it's not applicable. Just building our thinking in those layers, and then formulating policy proposals is also easier because you know what is the target or what is the aspiration. And congratulations on the special issue. I would like to emphasize that. So whoever have not downloaded the copy, please do. These are great contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka. And that's really interesting about zeroing in on the characteristics of job quality, addressing transformations, and then picking up the challenges which help to move us from a narrower conception of job quality to societal issues about sustainability, ethics, and a whole lot of other aspects. And of course, you're preaching to a converted audience here because we all put work at the center. Not everyone else. Some see it as an obstacle, as you say, rather than a means for people to fulfill and enrich their lives. Now, we're going to move on to the first of the contributions to this special issue. And we have, on behalf of the team of Nicolas Roby, Christian Lévesque, myself, and Dalia Gesualdi-Fecteau, we have Dalia who's going to speak initially. Now, Dalia, I just wondered if you wanted to, this is the quick question, pick up on anything that Agnieszka said and said, yeah, right on. I think that that's especially important.
Thank you very much, Gregor. And I'd like also to thank the interpreters here today that allowed this meeting to be in both languages. Thank you for all your work. And I'm sorry yet again for how fast I will be speaking. It's something I try to work on, but not easy in all times. So thank you, Gregor. Thank you, Agnieszka, for these opening comments. So I'd pick up on two quick things that Agnieszka said. I think that one of the main issues that we're facing today is that we've been thinking of precarity in a lot in the past years, but what we're witnessing today is that on the one hand, people that have very typical traditional employment forms also face uncertainty, also face worse work, also see their employment conditions degrading, I'd say, and that I'd say piles on to the numerous different groups of workers that are facing precarious employment conditions. I think that another key thing that Agnieszka said, and that really this issue of transfer really feeds into, is how actors are reacting to what's happening, and how we have to be attentive to how actors, different sets of actors, trade unions, the state, but also individual workers and different social society groups, how actors are reacting to what's happening for better, but also for worse, and how we have to be attentive to different, very, very local initiatives that can be thought of not just from a local perspective, but also should be thought of as great initiatives that could impulse and redirect the way we think better or worse work. So that would be my initial comments for that. Thank you, Gregor.
Great, Dalia. And the other speakers, be forewarned, the moderator loves to ask you questions about what the person just before you said. So you have to zone in and not zone out. Otherwise, you have a high degree of risk here. Active listening. Je suis totalement navré que j'ai pas parlé de l'interprétation. Et si vous cliquez sur l'interprétation en bas de l'écran, Dalia a souligné que nos interprètes travaillent fort et vous facilitent la compréhension. So I just want to emphasize that there is a globe at the bottom of your screen. Normally, if you click on that, you'll have access to the interpretation in one language or the other, and you can have the original language in both cases if that's an option for you. So, prière de choisir l'option qui vous convient. Please choose the option that suits you best. And we'll go back to you, Dalia, and say, okay, the coordinators of this issue wrote a piece which is at the outset of the special issue. How does that contribute to our thinking about making work better?
Okay, thank you, Gregor. So I think that to start off with, I think that the goal of the contribution is really to provide a dynamic and multi-dimensional conceptual tool to think about better and worse work. And I'd say, moreover, the trajectories that lead to one rather than the other. So I think we all know that the bulk of the research is focused a lot on specific jobs, on job quality from a specific job perspective. And what we tried to lay out is really a broader approach to work and to think how jobs are embedded in societies, which really feeds into the idea of better work for better society. So what the contribution lays out is really three constitutive dimensions of better work, which embrace as a whole what we think as of an overarching normative goal. So the idea here of the framework is really infused with these democratic ideals, as better work is not simply a set of procedural rules, but rather a process that intertwines democratic ideals and equal access to opportunities. So on these three dimensions, the first dimension is obviously the allocation of social risk, as better work, opposed to worse work, should ensure the physical, psychosocial integrity at work, but also enable workers to construct their life trajectories and that work sustain themselves and their families. So we all know that contemporary labor market is marked by a rise of economic insecurity for individuals. Now, what we're really trying to think of here is how the uneven distribution of risk leads to greater social inequality, which often constellates women, young workers, racialized workers, and migrants in precarious jobs. So first dimension, allocation of social risk. The second dimension would be the degree of autonomy at work. And here, really the idea is to think of work arrangements, how work arrangements lead to work intensification and extensification, which are reflected in various ways. The increase of the number of tasks that have to be carried out simultaneously, the heavy and standardized tasks that leave workers less room for maneuver and that have to deal with tighter deadlines, and obviously leading to an increase in time devoted to work versus time that's devoted for all the rest. So for workers, in our perspective, autonomy at work is often a question of their ability to exercise control over their lives at work, but also in a way, exercise control over their lives outside work. And the idea here of autonomy in a way of managing working hours, working schedules, and be able to navigate the frontiers between work and other responsibilities. The third dimension of our framework is the idea of expressiveness, which really embraces self-realization, voice, and engagement. And here, what we're trying to think of is, what are the exit options that workers can weigh? To what extent is work meaningful? How can workers voice their concerns and contribute to the democratic life of their communities? So I think that we have to place these three dimensions, and the way we really thought of here is really taking the locus or the standpoint of the workers to really understand how workers navigate the constraints and possibilities of these three dimensions, and in a way which will often lead to difficult and paradoxical trade-offs. So just to give a few examples, in a way, some workers will be willing to give up part of their autonomy or expressiveness for greater financial security. And for others who will value greater autonomy or expressiveness will be exposed to greater risks. So the challenge here, and that's what we're trying to really pose in this first piece of the special issue, is to understand how, in the context of a reordering of the modes of governance at work, how these three dimensions interact, and the nature of the consequences for better and worse work, and the choices that are being made by workers in their lives. So what we also think, and this kind of feeds on to the rest of the webinar, and other of my colleagues will speak to this, but the result of the analysis of these trade-offs must inspire the actors of the world of work to deploy strategies to intervene on these different levels and different dimensions towards better work. I'm just going to conclude by saying that what really inspired us, I think, I hope my colleagues agree, but in this contribution, is that taking a holistic approach to these three dimensions really offers us a path towards thinking the collective capabilities to achieve broader goals as we think of better work, an essential component of a better society. Thank you, Gregor. Thank you,
Dalia, and I'm sure that our colleague Christian is going to pick up some of these points when he intervenes in the second round on strategies. The next contribution that we want to feature is by Valeria Pulignano, Claudia Marà, Milena Franca, and Carol Muzinski. And I think that Valeria, you're going to speak initially here. And two very quick questions, which is not the main question, but just a lead in. Is there anything that makes you optimistic in these last years where you've been working on platform work, care work, individualization of risk, and that's it. All of those individualization of risk, all of those different elements. Is there anything that makes you optimistic that work can be made better and not worse? And as I say, that's not the main question, but just an easy lead in.
Thank you very much, Gregor, and really great to be with all of you. And yeah, very good question and very difficult to answer, I think, particularly today. If you look at what is happening in the European Parliament, and I know that Claudia will elaborate a bit more on that. Well, shall we be optimistic or not? I think probably half and half, in the sense that, you know, if we look at the more macro sort of context where we are, also in Europe, particularly today, there was this discussion about the austerity measures. So, you know, this brings a bit of kind of not very nice positive thinking about what will happen in the future, perhaps. But if we look at also the way in which unions, despite all the kind of difficulties they have nowadays, and particularly the people, the workers, in different contexts, in different sectors, are responding to the kind of conditions that they are in, including the platform workers. And we do know now we have a new kind of hope with the European directive on platform work in Europe, where we all, hope the situation will improve. And we do know that unions are trying to do their own best, and workers will also be there to fight for their own rights. But I'm a bit kind of not fully positive, but I wish that situation will certainly improve in the future. Well, actually should improve. Otherwise, we lose. Everybody will lose in society. We lose a battle, really.
Right, and thank you, Valeria. So apologies to ask you a hard question at the outset, but we know that the glass is always 1/16 full. So we have to look at the bright side here, but also how to construct from this, because it's as if you say that that children's nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and can we put the standard employment relationship back together again? Perhaps not, but we then have to do something else, and that's what we're struggling with. And your article is a brilliant example of that, in the sense that I ask you, tell us a bit about the article from the four of you, what it seeks to do and how it advances our thinking about making work better.
Thank you. Yeah, so I will try to link and to expose a little bit what our article does and how perhaps can contribute to look a bit more or to link to the quality of jobs. So, well, first of all, let me say that this is an article which in fact focuses on, and one of the most important dimensions that Dalia just mentioned, which is the risk. And the risk dimension of work in a particular context, which is in fact a context of the platform work. And specifically within platform work, we look at one particular sector, which is the care sector, in platforms, which is, quite interesting and important to look at. Now, why it is important? Because, in fact, we do know that the advent of digital labor platforms in, can we say, new, but also old sectors like care within the economy requires particularly researchers, ourselves, and policymakers also to question what is the impact that this new mode of labor organization has on workers' livelihoods and also job quality. And, although advocates of the digital economy claim that labor platforms offer innovative solutions for labor market failures, multiple studies have already pointed to the degradation of the working conditions in platform work. And here in our article, we look at one, we think, perhaps relatively not so much looked aspect, which is the aspect of unpaid labor, which we conceptualize not only in a traditional way, which is socially reproductive labor, but in a kind of new way in terms of looking at the time and effort, which is dedicated by workers to perform tasks which are part of their own jobs and job characteristic, but which, for whatever kind of reasons, these people are not paid for. Now, our article, we think that offers an kind of in-depth account of the forms and conditions of this unpaid labor in the care platform economy. And what we argue in our article is that the quittances of bad work, representing a crucial aspect of the risk characterized by the growing precarity of working lives under platform labor regime, is something that in fact we have to look at. Now, how this contributes to the debate on job quality and platform works, we think in different ways. Well, first of all, our study illustrates how in the care service sector, workers commit to unpaid labor and also to this kind of circle of worse work or bad work. And why they do that, what are the causes of this? Well, first of all, we point to the business models of platforms and the ways in which they, in fact, hamper the working conditions, particularly the access of worker to client informations and also access to jobs. Now, just linking back to what Agnieszka was mentioning at the very beginning. It is also unpaid labor is also, we see the results of the scant supervision of contractual arrangements between the intermediate parties, thus the leading to informal employment that deprives, in fact, workers of access, particularly to social protection, so harming the kind of conditions of those workers. And finally, we see that the high degree of risk associated with these working arrangements is also linked to the institutional conditions which underpin such unpaid labor. And here particularly, we contribute to show how different institutional settings, as the state and government also are to some extent responsible in the way in which they reform the labor market, not in the way in which should be reformed, are also responsible for the way in which then these kind of worse scenarios for workers in terms of bad working conditions and bad quality jobs are created. So to conclude, where platforms operate across national borders and should be taking account of the diversity of family policies, the failure to adapt to specific national regulations further accentuates informal working arrangements, as we show, which are detrimental, in fact, to the workers using these kind of platforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valeria. And I just want to congratulate your team on this really finely nuanced study of comparable types of work in different institutional contexts and institutional contexts which are not that different, but where it does make a difference, those institutions. And I think that, Sarah, when we move over to you, and can I remind everyone that we have interpretation at the bottom of the screen. Click on that, and you'll have access to the fine interpretation being done by our two interpreters. Et moi, j'en profite, Sarah, pour poser la question. Est-ce que vous vous êtes reconnu dans l'étude de Valeria et ses collègues dans la présentation de la Belgique et de la France? Autrement dit, est-ce que vous avez pu retirer une leçon de leur constat? And je cherche Sarah.
Oui, je suis là.
Ah bon, parfait. Excusez-moi de vous poser une question comme ça.
Non, pas de souci. Par contre, j'ai fait la bêtise j'étais restée sur la langue anglaise tout à l'heure. Et donc, quand vous avez parlé en français, je suis passée sur l'interprétation et j'ai raté un bout de la question. Il y a eu un petit décalage entre les deux. Mais je pense que c'est quelle leçon je tire de la présentation précédente.
Exactement.
OK, merci. Alors, c'est vrai qu'on a des contributions, je pense, qui se complètent, parce que je partage complètement les constats qui sont faits sur l'individualisation des risques pour ces travailleurs des plateformes. Nous, on est parti sur une autre question de recherche qui n'est pas complètement la situation des travailleuses et des travailleurs, qu'il faut absolument étudier aussi, mais la réaction de certains, on a appelé ça certains corps de l'État social français, la réaction de ces espaces plus ou moins administratifs vis-à-vis de ces travailleurs des plateformes. Et la principale leçon de discussion que je tire de la présentation de Valeria et de leurs travaux, ce sera mon mot de conclusion. Donc, je vous laisse le suspense. Non. En tout cas, nous, voilà, notre contribution, donc avec Dominique Méda et Émilien Julliard, hein, qui n'ont pas pu être là aujourd'hui, mais qui viendront à d'autres futurs événements. Notre contribution, elle a visé à aller étudier le travail d'agents dont la mission professionnelle est de participer à l'amélioration du travail. Donc, on est face à un travail sans doute plutôt dégradé, comme la présentation précédente l'a évoqué, comme tout ce qui a été dit jusque-là le laisse entendre, ces politiques de travail assez agressives, néolibérales, qui viennent plutôt dégrader des protections qui s'étaient mises en place. Donc, voilà, nous, le contexte, c'est bien celui-ci, de ce travail de plateforme, ubérisé, précarisé, en tout cas cette externalisation massive du travail sur les plateformes. Mais ce qu'on est allé regarder, c'est donc comment les corps de l'État social œuvrent pour une meilleure protection des travailleurs sur ces plateformes. Donc d'un côté, l'inspection du travail, acteur peut-être plus connu, plus étudié. De l'autre, un qui l'est peut-être moins, les caisses de sécurité sociale en France, et notamment les agents qui sont chargés du recouvrement, donc d'aller chercher les cotisations que devraient payer les entreprises et que parfois elles ne payent pas. Et donc, dans ces caisses de sécurité sociale, il y a finalement aussi des contrôleurs et des inspecteurs qui ont des missions qui sont finalement parfois assez proches de celles des inspecteurs du travail. Puisque notamment, ils et elles ont la possibilité de requalifier une situation de travail qui serait misclassified, quoi, mal classifiée. Et ce qu'on a vu, c'est que ces agents d'inspection vont s'inquiéter à double titre de l'essor des plateformes, de modèles de travail, en tout cas sur ces plateformes. D'une part, ils s'inquiètent justement du manque de protection de ces travailleurs. Donc ça rejoint bien les questions de risque qui sont reportées sur les travailleurs. Donc des travailleurs peu protégés, alors même que ce sont des activités assez accidentogènes, hein, notamment la livraison de repas, le transport. Et puis, ils s'inquiètent aussi du manque à gagner pour l'État, puisque ce sont autant, enfin pour la sécurité sociale en tout cas, puisque ce sont des cotisations qui ne sont pas payées. Si on estime que les plateformes devraient salarier les travailleurs, elles ne le font pas et donc elles ne payent pas des cotisations sociales sur ceux qui finalement pourraient bien être leurs salariés et donc pour lesquels elles devraient normalement cotiser. Donc finalement, voilà, ces agents vont un peu unir leurs forces pour dénoncer ce modèle avec comme outil principal finalement de réinscrire ces travailleurs des plateformes dans le cadre du salariat, qui reste un peu le refuge. Ça reste l'espace auquel on va recourir pour protéger, pour remettre ces travailleurs dans du droit social et dans du droit du travail. En l'occurrence, c'est bien ce qui leur paraît être le statut juste, hein, pour ces travailleurs, puisqu'en raison de la subordination, qui commence maintenant à être bien, bien renseignée, hein, la subordination dans laquelle ils sont pris vis-à-vis des plateformes, que ce soit en termes de contrôle, de sanctions, etc. Et bien finalement, le salariat serait la situation juste et la situation qui leur permettrait d'avoir un travail amélioré, en tout cas une protection sociale améliorée. Sur vraiment le contenu du travail, finalement, là, on n'est pas tout à fait dans cette question-là. Là, il ne s'agit pas tellement d'améliorer le contenu de leur travail ou même leur autonomie. On est assez loin de ça. Pour ça, il ne faudrait pas partir sur d'autres modèles, plutôt les alternatives aux plateformes, les coopératives, etc. Et donc, mon mot de la fin qui vient de discuter avec la présentation précédente, c'est que ce travail nous a semblé essentiel. En France, il a quand même mené à donc des contrôles menés sur les travailleurs des plateformes et à des procès-verbaux qui sont ensuite adressés à la justice pouvant décider de poursuivre, ce qu'elle a fait déjà plusieurs fois en France maintenant, des plateformes pour travail dissimulé. Mais ce qu'il faut voir, c'est que ces actions publiques, donc qui sont assez dissidentes, hein, par rapport à la ligne politique du gouvernement, mais elles ne concernent quasiment que des travailleurs masculins. Les plateformes qui sont visées par ces activités de contrôle et d'accusation sont les plateformes les plus visibles dans la rue, les plus médiatiques, mais qui sont aussi des plateformes d'activité quasi exclusivement masculines, et les plateformes d'activité féminines, les gardes d'enfants, le ménage, toutes les activités de care, en grande partie, hein, sont, elles, encore largement dans l'ombre des actions de contrôle et donc de retour au droit.
Super, merci beaucoup, Sarah. Et pour les membres de l'équipe, Émilien Juliard et Dominique Médard. C'est une étude fascinante en raison du fait que vous avez réussi à trouver des alliés, mais l'aspect genré nous fait frémir aussi parce que on pose la question et je vous le pose, question courte. Euh, Pourquoi les plateformes qui relèvent du travail des soins, du travail de care, ne font pas le même objet d'analyse par l'inspectorat du travail?
Alors, je ne pense pas qu'il y ait un biais de discrimination de genre. On a quand même pas mal, en plus, c'est pas une réponse satisfaisante en tant que telle, mais pas mal d'agents de contrôle et d'inspection sont des femmes, hein. On a rencontré beaucoup d'inspectrices du travail, donc je pense pas il et elle n'aient pas en tête ces activités. Bon, il y a quand même peut-être une raison plus acceptable, c'est que ces activités sont quand même largement moins développées. Les plateformes d'activité féminine, en termes de nombre de travailleuses, de travailleurs, sont quand même plus limitées. On voit d'ailleurs les chercheuses parfois qui travaillent là-dessus, cherchent elles-mêmes à s'inscrire sur les plateformes, mais parfois elles peinent un petit peu à trouver des missions pour se mettre dans la peau de ces travailleuses. C'est pas encore quelque chose qui est aussi développé. Les enquêteurs hommes qui se sont mis à faire de la livraison de repas l'ont fait plus facilement, peut-être que les chercheuses. Donc je pense quand même que ces activités sont moins développées. Et puis, je pense quand même qu'il y a toujours cette distinction, l'extérieur, l'intérieur, le public, le privé. Ces activités féminines sont davantage dans l'ombre, elles se déroulent dans les foyers, elles sont moins visibles. Pourtant, elles posent aussi d'autres problèmes en termes, par exemple aussi de violences sexuelles, hein, vis-à-vis des travailleuses. Mais c'est vrai que pour le moment, je pense que la visibilité, l'espace extérieur, le nombre ont joué en faveur de ces plateformes d'activité masculine.
Ok, merci beaucoup. C'est tellement intéressant et il reviendra plus tard quand nous parlons de stratégie. Elisa, on behalf of the team of Maxime Beleggio and Virginia Doellgast, Ginny Doellgast, your article has everything. Tragedy, a strengthened labor movement, an ability to have social dialogue, a whole range of things. Why don't we jump straight in and you can tell us a bit about how your article contributes to our thinking about better work?
Thank you so much, Gregor. Yes, so our article is a case study. So I'll give you a very quick overview of what happened, and then the lessons we've learned from the case. So the case study is about the work reorganization at France Telecom after the social crisis that happened in the late 2000s. So maybe many people know what happened, but basically the social crisis happened in the form of a well-being crisis and a wave of worker suicides right after a restructuring of the organization. So this first restructuring was all designed by management without consultation with workers. It had a very top-down approach, and it was based on centralized control, pressures on workers to relocate, change their roles, and an overall very narrow division of labor. So labor was reorganized with very narrow specializations that led to the skilling of entire units of workers and technicians in particular. So this first restructuring was distressing. It caused a well-being crisis and as Gregor said, a tragedy that led to the death of more than 30 workers. It also had bad organizational outcomes. So in this context, unions managed to obtain a change in leadership. So we have covered this process in another article, which I will touch upon when we discuss the strategies later on. But our article in Transfer, in this special issue, is about the new arrangements that were institutionalized after the social crisis to support collective worker voice, impact on management practices. So
these are the Europeans complaining
Sorry?
about how platform workers don't get any rights or protections. And they
Sorry?
don't.
I think we
okay.
have a technical
Yeah,
problem.
that-
Sorry. Yeah, no, I'm hearing someone else speaking. Okay, it's fine now. So sorry about that. So as I was saying, after the social crisis, work was reorganized to adopt a new model that reversed many of the most poisonous, health-destroying practices that were implemented in the previous reorganization. And this was achieved through conflict partnership between unions and employers. So this new culture was basically based on balancing employee and employer interests. Managers were happy to in the end because they realized that jointly improving working conditions led to also enhancing productivity and service quality. So the gains of introducing mechanisms of representation of workers' voice were actually beneficial for everybody, for workers' well-being, for preventing stress in the workplace, and all other actors involved. So in practice, what happened is, first of all, in terms of how the work was reorganized, the de-skilling process was inverted because the new organizational structure was based on workers' autonomy. Workers were allowed to focus on solving problems as opposed to executing menial tasks. They were part of multi-skilled teams where they could collaborate and work together to get a more meaningful kind of job. And so to sum up, in terms of how our contribution helps our thinking about making work better, I would highlight two crucial aspects. So the first is a methodological one, which focuses on partnership between the organization, workers, and unions. So we talk about the process on how to get to a better work, as Dalia was saying in her contribution. So we got to this arrangement of social partnership through unions and workers' empowerment. But when they got there all together, they managed to actually get to better conditions in an institutionalized way, in a very participative way. So with the common aim of reducing psychosocial risks and improving well-being. And the second aspect is a more practical one. So how does better work look like in this specific case? And better work for France Telecom technicians meant more autonomy, upskilling, and more choice for workers. So these are the key points.
Great, Elisa. That's so interesting. And maybe just a quick supplementary question. Is this a set of circumstances that a union or a group of workers could replicate in another context? Is there something that we can take away from your case that say, look, what they were able to do, if you do A, B, C, and it will never be identical, this could lead to better work?
Well, I would say yes. Of course, this was a very peculiar situation in which unions were able to increase their power because of, as you said, the tragic element of this specific case. But I think that organizations, not just unions, could learn from this case, because what they got in the end through this social partnership were also better organizational outcomes in terms of productivity, satisfaction of customers, and this was achieved just by giving unions and workers voice, and also giving more space to those managers who were more willing to prioritize well-being of workers because they knew that this would lead to better long-term outcomes. So I would say that including and enhancing voice mechanisms within organizations could be a very good step in this direction.
Can I just quickly add to that? I think the original paper that we wrote, which I guess Elisa will also talk about later, focused on these different actions that unions took to try to publicize and to create a shared understanding of the problem within the organization. And that's, I think, one of the implications for unions. So I became interested in this case because I was working on a project for Uni ICTS on worker well-being and burnout and call center and stress. They asked me to write a report and they used it for their Global Call Center Action Month, really around some of these themes. You know, how do we develop a shared discourse that what management is doing is directly connected to the burnout and the really bad health outcomes of workers, but that's also connected to poor performance outcomes. And so these two pieces of, on the one hand, really prioritizing worker well-being as a human rights kind of issue in itself, that's part of corporate social responsibility, but on the other hand, saying this is also bad for organizational performance. And that was really important to how the unions were framing the impact of management restructuring. And that also became an important part of the solution, that we can come together over more mutual gains type approaches to work organization that both have this explicit focus on well-being as, legitimately an outcome of the organization. But on the other hand, it's something that contributes to a different model that can also be a competitive model that helps improve customer service and the quality of the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Virginia Doellgast, who's also one of the authors of this study. And I really want to emphasize how interesting these different contributions are and what you can take away from them. We're going to move on to the next contribution now by Nicholas Hammer from Leicester University in the UK. And Nick, my short question is, despite your youthful demeanor, you've been working on value chains for quite a long time. Has this work led to better work? And I'm not asking specifically about apparel chains right now because you're going to speak to that next.
This is a good question. Thank you, and thank you for the CRIMT and ETUI team. You're asking whether it has led to better work in the UK or in general?
Just in general, because you've worked so long on everything from commodity chains, flour chains, construction chains, apparel chains, all kinds of things. And I'm just, when you look at these, honestly, decades of research on value chains, can we say, yeah, it's managed to move the dial forward on some aspects of better work or not? And then we'll get into your actual contribution to the special issue.
Yeah, I think there is there has always been a discourse about the civilizing role of globalization, and in that sense also of value chains, as arguing that as companies, regions across the world are drawn into the global economy, that leads to a kind of a reverse trickle down of better standards and processes. But I think that it's very difficult to prove that has been the case. It's probably more the contrary. And I would certainly say that's from the chains that I've looked at. I would say that it has not led to better work, certainly not in the global south.
So thank you, Nick, on that optimistic note, but realistic note. Tell us a bit more about your article and into this thematic issue and how it contributes to our thinking about making work better.
Yeah, so the idea of seeing how lead firms in value chains have a lot of power to set the terms of engagement within chains. They also have a lot of monopsonistic power. So in that sense, they really run the show. in the apparel value chain, in many senses, that has led to suppliers producing below cost, and in consequence led to a lot of workers being super exploited, in the sense that they don't even get the means to reproduce from their wages. And that's a very a stark situation. And what I have, and I think it's important also to sort of realize that obviously the workers do not have union representation. They have sometimes, let's say, civil society organizations that offer advocacy and campaigning, but at the same time, the government institutions in the producer countries are often very hostile as well. So it's a very difficult space to work in and to organize, to get representation and voice. And what I've been interested in, starting from a case in the UK, where there has been a boom in, counterintuitive boom in garment production from 2008 onwards, probably for about 10 years. I was interested in how the competitor countries look like in Eastern Europe as well as in Northern Africa, and to what extent they have been able to upgrade in economic senses as well as in social respect. And I've looked at data from 1995 to 2020, so a 25 period. And in a sense, the results are as stark as I started in the introduction to first question, that companies in those countries have not been able to increase their market share and their unit costs at the same time. So there's always been a very stark trade-off for them in an economic sense. And at the same time, any gains could not be sustained. And on top of that, any gains always occurred at the cost of social upgrading. So that has always been bought at the expense of declines in real wages or jobs. And that was for a set of countries in Eastern Europe that are part of the European Union now, and then countries where a lot of the offshoring, the nearshoring has occurred to Turkey, Tunisia, and Morocco. So I believe, and probably one thing to add, was the data in relation to the work that, for example, Agnieszka is doing on job quality. The data along value chains and in international comparison are not very good. So it's a very rough data set in that sense. But at the same time, I think we have to probably consider that if we take into account the informal economy, which is quite considerable in many of those countries, the picture probably would be much more negative than it is on the basis of the formal official data that we have.
Have I got this wrong, Nick, that whereas Elisa and Ginny, in some senses, identified elements of a high road for France Telecom, you're saying there's such a direct trade-off between unit cost, competitiveness, and social upgrading that it looks more like low road than high road. Have I got that wrong?
No, I think that's correct. I would agree with that, because there are no institutions really that you could leverage to even have a dialogue, I would say.
But in the second round, you're going to tell us about the institution you want to create that will...
I know that you're going to ask about strategy, yes.
Yes, great. And the great thing about being a single author is you'll have to answer both questions. So there we are. Let's move over to Olga and Alita. And you can tell me if I have this wrong, Olga, who's in the Norwich Business School. We always talk about training as the great elixir. And my takeaway, and you tell me if I've got it wrong from your piece, is for a lot of unemployed young people, no training is better than crap training.
I think that's nicely put. Yes, I think you're right. We see training as almost a panacea for lots of things. And I think probably in the policy arena, the way training is incentivized, particularly in the UK, it becomes a numbers game often, and not so much about the quality and thinking about the user. So yes, I would agree on that summary.
Well, let's go over to your article between you and Elita, and tell us a bit about the article and how it contributes to our thinking about better work. And there are so many interesting aspects to this article.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, so this article focuses in on training and trying to understand or unpack a little bit more about how training might be a pathway to better outcomes for individuals. I suppose in doing that, there's some caveats in that we're using a survey. It's a Understanding Society survey, which is a UK British household survey. So it has the advantage of being able to provide representative longitudinal data with around 57,000 individuals that we track over 10 years. But it doesn't have the nuances, of course, then that a qualitative piece of work will have. But within that frame, what we were trying to do was understand how training may lead to more positive outcomes measured through how individuals evaluate their own life satisfaction. And we also wanted to look specifically at how disadvantage of the individual might make a difference to the impact of that training, and also how the quality of that training may have a differential impact. So I think in sum, really what we were finding was that the disadvantage, if you can unpack training a little bit more, then we know that those people that end up often in poor quality work tend to have multiple disadvantages. So if we look at the training, actually it's that group, the more disadvantaged, that tend to benefit most from the training if it's well designed. So for example, we had long-term unemployed had some of the biggest boosts to their life satisfaction from accessing high quality training. The same for living in disadvantaged areas of England. There's a really interesting one with the disadvantaged areas. It's a new metric that's introduced in government data sets, and it looks at only in England at the moment, not the other 4 nations of the UK, but within England we can find the most deprived areas and break them into different quartiles. Those individuals living in the most deprived areas, where there will be the least access to a whole range of social and economic resources, benefited most from actually non-work-based training. So it's access to kind of community learning activities, initiatives, hobby-based training, sports initiatives and training. And that was the same, of course, for those in long-term employment. So one of the takeaways I think from that is much of the work on training and life satisfaction, or training and job quality, focuses on work-based training or job-related training. Our work was really demonstrating that there are other forms of learning that are really boosting probably that social capital, that self-esteem, that confidence aspects, that is having the effect and creating and supporting individuals probably into other pathways. So it might be a first block in some of the learning that happens. So the non-work-based training was really important. And the other thing we found was young people who were just entering the labour market, if they're engaging in high quality, long duration training, that's a huge boost to their life satisfaction. However, if they're only engaging in low quality, short duration training, it actually has a negative impact on their life satisfaction. So again, the age dimension here really coming to the fore. What are the aspirations or expectations individuals have? So I suppose our piece was trying to focus on the individual, what their expectations from life are, and how training might be able to be an important lever, but for which groups, how and when. Okay.
Super. That's really so interesting, and it adds a dimension to our attempt to broaden out job quality. It's not just better societies that make for better work, it's better lives that make for better work. And in this sense, flushing it out as someone who recently saw the Ken Loach film on the Old Oak, which is about such communities and the role of solidarity in this. And there's a lot of life learning skills that come out in this. Not that that's the key focus, but you're taking huge data sets and pulling out really important insights. And I think that it's interesting for everyone to think about how to make work better. But we'll come back to that. Now, the last in the series of articles that we have from the contributions to the special issue, and not the least, is by Gerhard Bosch, who is currently waiting for a major conference to begin celebrating an anniversary of collective bargaining in Germany. And if I reduce your article to one equation, Gerhard, and you can tell me if I've got it wrong, just transition requires extensive collective bargaining coverage. Have I got that wrong?
Yeah, no, this is absolutely true. It requires high coverage by collective agreements, but it requires also retraining. And I liked very much, you didn't ask me the question, what I drew from Olga's contribution. I expected this question.
Hey, Gerhard, what did you get from Olga's contribution?
Yeah, okay, thank you for asking me this question. Well, I think it's absolutely important to look at the quality of training. And after the Hartz laws in Germany, the quality of retraining deteriorated, and we had a lot of I would call it fast food training, job application in 2 days, and this did not help the workers at all, and it destroyed their confidence. And it had a negative, even a neutral or a negative impact on job chances and on wages in future. And the second point, which is very important, we have so disadvantaged groups which are not used to learning, that with standardized formats of learning, we will not succeed. So that we have to define new formats of learning in work creation programs, where people build up confidence and then do work-based learning. And then in the long term, they can probably do a real vocational training. So I'm coming to my contribution now. My contribution is a little bit different from the others, because I'm not looking on job quality in existing jobs, but I'm looking at job quality of future jobs. And I asked the question, which risks are linked with the digitalization and the green transformation, and both are structural change. This means that people might lose their job. They have to change the job within the company, or they have to change the company and find a new job somewhere else. So I developed a kind of matrix of risks, and it's quite clear, if you have an inclusive employment system, then all these risks can be mitigated. There can take place retraining within the company. You have a well-developed system of lifelong learning financed by the state or through contributions to the unemployment insurance. And also you have a very egalitarian wage system with a high coverage by collective agreements. Then your income risks are not so high. So I'm looking at Germany and the special risks in Germany. And Germany used to have an inclusive employment system until 1990. Then we had a coverage by collective agreements of 85%. Today, we are down to 50% through product market deregulation, labor market deregulation, etc. So our labor market is dualized with a well-paid primary segment and low-paid secondary segment, and also with the hard laws of 2003, our system of lifelong learning was partly deregulated, and the train first approach was replaced by the work first approach. This meant people were not given the chance to do a retraining, but they were pressed into low-wage jobs. So when you ask a German trade unionist, a German worker, a German works councillor in a big manufacturing company, what do you expect from the transformation? The first answer will come, oh, I'm afraid that I lose the job here and will end up in a low-paid job in the secondary segment of the labor market. And of course, if blue-collar workers are the losers of the transformation, they will probably vote for populist right-wing parties who deny climate change, and the transformation is blocked. So if we really adjust in transformation is important for making the transformation really happen and viable, and not being blocked as you find these signs in many countries. So what is important? The first thing, it is important to mitigate the risk of not being trained for the new job and then end up in a less skilled job with less autonomy, etc. And I described in my article all the reforms in the last 10 years in Germany, which are more or less a reversal of the Hartz reforms in retraining. And we really have quite progressive reforms. And concerning lifelong learning, the initiatives came from the trade unions, the Social Democratic Party, and the Greens. And now we have a clear priority of training to fast placements in labor market policy. And we have inclusive reforms in our grant systems, also for people who are above 30 years. This was opened up to people up to 45 years to get a grant and a loan for individual initiated retraining. And the unions at company level, they have strong resources at the works councillors for in co-determination, and they really can use these resources, these legal resources of co-determination, to bring through a more proactive personal planning. The problem was that in the past they didn't use these resources very well, and there's a new tendency of the unions to sign so-called future-orientated collective agreements in companies. And these are agreements on a kind of extended co-determination, and there are parity commissions between employers and unions which deal with the risks, the future risk, and organize early retraining and extend vocational training, etc. So this is really an important change of trade union policy in the direction of proactive policy. And the last point are the income risks, and there I cannot tell the same story as for retraining, because the income risks in Germany are quite high because of the dualization of the labor market, and until now there is no sign, no indicator, the indication that the decline of collective bargaining will be stopped. And probably in the next round, I will talk a little bit more on reforms, how to increase the coverage by collective agreements and which instruments may be useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerhard. And if we wanted a palpable demonstration that no work or worse work makes for worse societies, you've also demonstrated that. So we have the causality moving in multiple directions here between
Yes.
the better lives, better societies, better work, and worse. It's all there. And I have a takeaway here. And of course, we as academics love this. It's incredibly complex, which is true, but that doesn't really help us. And we wanted to make this webinar something which is more practical. We have to take account of the complexity of the challenges, but we've asked each team of authors to come up initially with one strategy, one policy. On a demandé à chaque équipe de formuler une stratégie, une politique, de faire avancer, de faire réfléchir sur l'amélioration du travail, how to make work better by one strategy. And I'll ask people to put up their hands, just to volunteer. And I also want to emphasize that there's some really interesting contributions going on in the chat, which is exactly what we wanted. And my dear colleague, Christian Lévesque, who's there, will know that he's already put up his hand, even though we don't see it. So Christian, if you wanted to break the ice and come in, and then we'll ask others to come in as and when you want. And you'll know that if you don't put up your hand, I'm going to ask you anyway. So you're better to put up your hand, except for Christian, who's already done it.
Merci, Grégard. Donc, ça s'inscrit dans la foulée de la présentation que Dalia a fait sur notre cadre d'analyse. Je voudrais simplement souligner que c'est vraiment le résultat d'un travail collectif, d'échange avec plusieurs membres du CRIMT qu'on est arrivé à ce cadre d'analyse-là et qui s'inscrit vraiment dans les recherches qu'on effectue dans les milieux de travail. Je ne vais pas parler d'une stratégie syndicale en particulier, je vais plutôt axer sur les stratégies de formation syndicale. Et je vais utiliser ici le guide comme un cadre qui peut être exploité pour faire de la formation syndicale auprès notamment des délégués et pour les sensibiliser à toute la problématique d'un meilleur travail. Moi, je l'utilise dans les cours de formation que je donne qui durent quelques heures ou quelques jours. Et j'utilise ce guide-là, pas notre guide, mais le cadre qu'on a développé, comme un outil pour amener les délégués à faire une radiographie de leur milieu de travail ou, si vous voulez, scanner leur espace de travail. Et quand on commence ce processus-là, les discussions portent invariablement sur les risques, sur les questions économiques, sur l'insécurité, la diminution du pouvoir d'achat. Et donc, souvent, on va s'enfermer dans cette espèce de bulle-là, mais dès qu'on pousse un peu plus puis qu'on se met à creuser, bien là, ils mettent à sortir toute la question des risques psychosociaux, l'épuisement professionnel, les enjeux de protection. Bref, ils finissent par définir un ensemble de risques auxquels ils sont confrontés. Généralement, cet échange-là va déboucher, puis c'est ce que Gerhard disait tantôt, ça va déboucher sur les questions d'autonomie au travail, d'organisation du travail, d'intensification et aussi d'expressivité, c'est-à-dire quelle est la voice, quelle est la capacité des employés de pouvoir impacter leur environnement de travail. Ce que je trouve intéressant dans ce processus-là, c'est qu'on n'a même pas besoin de leur dire, ils le découvrent eux-mêmes, c'est que ces différentes dimensions-là sont liées les unes aux autres, que ce soit le risque, l'autonomie ou encore l'expressivité. Et ils voient bien les tensions qu'il y a et les contradictions qu'il peut y avoir lorsqu'on pousse dans une direction plutôt que dans une autre. Bon. Comment on concilie les exigences de sécurité au travail, sécurité, excusez-moi, économique, avec un épanouissement et un travail valorisant? Comment puis-je éviter de me retrouver dans un travail à la con, ce que Grabert appelait le bullshit jobs, et réaliser un travail socialement utile. Et donc, il y a toute une réflexion qui se fait à partir du travail des délégués sur leur milieu de travail. Et puis je vais conclure là-dessus. Je débouche dans un deuxième temps sur les pistes de solutions, sur les stratégies. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que là, ils ne partent pas des risques, ils partent de l'expressivité. Ils parlent des moyens qu'ils ont à leur disposition pour pouvoir renforcer les capacités d'action du travail, des travailleurs. Donc, je voulais illustrer ici que je pense qu'il faut aussi travailler conjointement, de manière co-construite avec les syndicats pour essayer de les outiller pour qu'ils puissent être en mesure de développer un narratif qui nous amène vers un better work pas juste, pas juste centré sur les dimensions économiques du Better Work, mais beaucoup plus large et qui touche également le contexte qui déborde le cadre de l'entreprise. Voilà, Grégoire, c'était ma contribution.
Ben, c'est toute une contribution, Christian, et on voit toute la richesse d'une expérience de co-construction est vraiment passionnant et très pratique. Alors, qui va intervenir en suivant Christian? Who wants to come up next? Just we have a limited amount of time, so we need you to jump in. There we are, Elisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregor. Thank you, Christian. Yeah, I just wanted to connect with what Christian just said about the narrative, because this was really my recommendation, one of the recommendations for unions. So linking back to the campaign France Telecom that made the experimentation possible. So basically, unions managed to achieve a strong public attention on the crisis and on workers' distress. And what was crucial was the union's ability to construct an internal narrative among the workforce, attributing work stress and burnout to management-driven restructuring, and then to communicate this narrative to the media. So bringing psychosocial stress to the attention of the workforce itself, and then to the public, and then clarifying the importance of monitoring risks at all levels, and to really make workers' well-being a legitimate objective of management practice. This was what determined the shift in the attention of the media, and what determined the ability of unions to increase their power to then get to the institutionalization of mechanisms of workers' voice, and for well-being improvement in the organization. So, yeah, that was it.
Thank you so much, Elisa. And I think that we see in both Christian and Elisa's comments this really fine-tuning into sequential logics, which help to construct arguments and to identify solutions. And it's really, you can't, that kind of qualitative work really assists people in helping to think through some of these issues. Who wants to come in next? Don't hesitate, otherwise you'll get asked. Okay, Olga.
Sorry, just finding the mute button. Far too many buttons. I suppose one of the things that I was reflecting on some of the work coming out was this blurring between the boundaries of work and life, and particularly with the increase in platform work. So I think one of the things that might be really interesting, and we're doing a little bit more experimenting in the UK on it, is more place-based strategies. So a much more conscious awareness of the place in which the disadvantage and the nature of that disadvantage. So the strategies are tailored to those areas, and there's collaborations between the employers, the community groups. And given how powerful those community groups can be in, as Gerhard was saying, you know, supporting those social skills, sometimes that readiness to work, or readiness to learn, or readiness to engage in lots of other things, that actually strategies see community and social prescribing as a legitimate way in which job quality can be enhanced, life outcomes can be enhanced. So taking a slightly less transactional approach, I suppose, to skills development and quality of skills, and more inclusion of community groups in place-based strategies. So I'll throw that in the mix. Thank you.
It's great. And Olga, it's clear that you should have been a geographer, and any geographer here will say place-based strategies. Yes, Gerhard.
Yeah, I described the dualistic German labor market, and this is not only Germany, but many other countries have dualistic labor markets. What are the best strategies? Yes, it's the increase of coverage by collective agreements. You can easily see if you look at Sweden, Denmark, where they have a coverage of 80–90%, the income differentiation is much lower, and the risk if you change a job is also very much lower. So I can give you some technical solutions how to do that, but this is not sufficient. We also need a political answer. In Germany, the unions fought for minimum wage for more than 10 years, and they only succeeded because it was they developed a narrative, a convincing narrative that on the bad impact of low wages on life quality and society, etc. They developed alliances within the society with churches, community groups, etc. So the result of this campaign was the minimum wage. The minimum wage did not come as a technical solution. And now the same has to be done with collective bargaining coverage, which is more difficult because minimum wage is probably a figure of €8.50 or $10 or $12. But it's not so easy to explain what collective bargaining means. But the unions are now trying to construct a narrative and win partners in society. And the narrative is on inclusiveness, on reducing risk of mobility, creating the acceptance of the transformation, etc. And I think this narrative is absolutely crucial. And since we have the minimum wage directive in Europe, many other countries, which sets the aim that all countries have to develop action plans to increase the coverage by collective agreement to 80%. All other European countries are confronted with the same problem. So we have to develop a European narrative on the importance of collective bargaining. And then, of course, you also need technical solutions how to do that. The easiest way in Germany would be extension of existing collective agreements to whole industries. This is completely blocked by the Employers Association, since it has to pass a committee, our National Collective Bargaining Committee, and both sides have the same number of votes, and the extension is only accepted if there's a majority in favor. And since the employers are always voting against it, there is no majority within this structure. So we either need independent chairperson or we need another rule that a majority has to reject the proposal. We do not have a political majority for changing this. But in the new coalition agreements, there's an agreement on a collective bargaining compliance act for federal orders. And this can be a big trigger for increasing collective bargaining coverage, because it would mean that for 500 billion public federal orders, the collective agreements have to be respected, like in the US prevailing wage laws. And we are expecting for the draft of the law. It was announced for last autumn, and I wrote this in my article, but it has not been published until now, since obviously the government has not agreed on this. But this is an important strategic step.
Thank you so much, Gerhard. Really interesting. Nick Hammer.
Thank you, Gregor. I sort of was triggered by the two previous speakers. So Elisa and Maxime and Ginny's paper, Elisa mentioned the role of appealing to public opinion, and in a way that always has been an important element in campaigning within global value chains, appealing to consumers. And the fact that they don't want products done through child labor or other forms of exploitation. I think to some extent it's obvious that this approach has its limits. The other strategy, to some extent, I was thinking of when Gerhard mentioned that the need to look for political answers. And what we've seen in many countries, also lately from the European Union level, is efforts to develop mandatory human rights due diligence procedures and frameworks. There's lots to be discussed. There's lots of devil, I think, in the detail. In a way, it's an effort to establish some form of playing field. I think, in my view, it reproduces a lot of the problems that private standards and their private compliance models and social auditing models have, and in many ways, certainly in the European version that has been agreed, I think 2 weeks ago, a lot of that comes through. It has been weakened quite significantly compared to the draft that the Parliament had proposed. I think what have been interesting strategies that trade unions and civil society organizations have produced, in contrast to the weaknesses of those models, is to look for enforceable agreements. So we're looking at examples that, for example, we can find in the Bangladesh and what's now the International Accord. In the UK, the unions and civil society organizations also have pursued an enforceable brand agreements for the sector, coupled with bottom-up organization, which I think was an interesting strategy. The UK obviously incentivizes free riding, so that agreement never came about because there were too many actors that jumped ship, and the government did not support it sufficiently. But I think they are good strategies, and there is more to be seen, I think, in the future on that side.
Really interesting, Nick. Thanks so much. Claudia?
Yes, thank you very much. And well, I mean, our paper doesn't necessarily directly speaks to union strategies, but I'll come to that in a bit. But first, I think the point that precedes it, and it does connect to what Nick said in terms of needing a policy response, like a political response. And it's in particular when it comes to the domestic care sector and the like platform workers in the sectors that we have studied, is really to we really want to flag up this need to make the platforms comply with the regulations that already exist in the domestic and care services. Because this is the first way to improve the working conditions of workers who access work through platforms, but still perform a kind of work that is regulated in the countries like France and Belgium that we studied. And in a way, following up on what Sarah was mentioning before, it is true that there is often a bit of more attention on other forms of work in the platform economy, such as the food delivery riders, for example. One reason for that is, for example, that domestic work is by definition in private households. So it's not a collective form of work that is in the way the labor process is organized. So it's we need the first and foremost, we need enforcement. We see that in this lack of enforcement of platforms vis-a-vis the regulations, there lies a big problem in that makes unpaid work proliferate. And so platforms should really, so the governments and agencies should make it in a way that platforms do enforce the formal stipulations of employment contracts that are such as under the national regulations. But this leads then to a second recommendations that we have, which is that in these sectors are already regulated, we said, although in very different, rather different ways between France and Belgium, which are the countries that we studied. But there are collective agreements in place already, but we also need to improve the standards and boost collective agreements in both countries, especially we see from our studies in France. So of course we need strong unions, but on the other side, we also need very strong countries and states. And by this, we really refer to states that can invest in welfare systems. And this is why Valeria, in the beginning, mentioned the vote that took place a couple of hours ago at the European Parliament, because we need states that can invest in public spending and that can invest in those services, in making care services affordable for those who benefit from it, so that it can match increased wages for the workers. Valeria, sorry, Sarah, and I see also Valeria.
Allez-y, Sarah, et puis Valeria.
Oui, alors effectivement, comment, je m'inscris dans la suite de ce que vient de dire Claudia, comment faire en sorte que les entreprises appliquent le droit du travail existant. Donc effectivement, là, je vais dire en un mot la stratégie des acteurs qu'on a observés, donc inspection du travail et inspecteurs des URSSAF, hein, des caisses de sécurité sociale. Eux, leur stratégie, effectivement, essentiellement pour faire un peu contre-pouvoir par rapport à l'orientation politique, c'est de recourir à la justice. Vraiment, c'est leur moyen d'action privilégié, alors même que l'inspection du travail, depuis plusieurs années, en France comme ailleurs, est de plus en plus incitée à accompagner, conseiller, etc., et ne plus pénaliser. Là, vraiment, ils ont eu une position de poursuivre et de criminaliser un petit peu ces pratiques des entreprises. Donc voilà, le recours à la justice. Après, ce recours à la justice ne doit pas rendre invisible le rôle central. De toute façon, je pense que ça est apparu dans beaucoup des réponses jusque-là sur cette deuxième tour de questions. C'est le rôle des syndicats qui me semble majeur. Je pense que si on veut le dire très clairement, si on veut améliorer le travail, il faut des syndicats plus forts. Nous, on l'a vu, c'est le cas pour les travailleurs des plateformes eux-mêmes, ceux qui sont le plus à même de participer à déposer des dossiers au prud'homme pour se faire requalifier sont évidemment évidemment non, mais on peut le supposer, ceux qui sont les plus proches des structures collectives et des syndicats, mais aussi les inspecteurs, inspectrices du travail, contrôleurs URSSAF qui sont le plus à même de s'intéresser à ces dossiers et de s'opposer un peu à la direction politique qui pèse sur eux, c'est aussi des inspecteurs qui sont syndiqués. Donc à tous les étages un petit peu qu'on peut observer, sans syndicat, le pouvoir de résistance est toujours beaucoup plus faible. C'est un peu une évidence, mais je pense que ça mérite d'être redit. Et je pense que de notre côté, les universitaires, on a aussi un rôle à jouer dans le fait de rendre visibles des conditions de travail dans des espaces de travail qui sont plus difficiles à aller observer, moins connus, plus récents, plus invisibilisés. Et puis de contrer aussi sans doute ce discours de disqualification des syndicats qui pèse très fortement sur l'image des syndicats, qui décourage un petit peu des jeunes, un ensemble de travailleurs, travailleuses qui les découragent un peu d'aller vers les syndicats à cause de discours à charge. Et donc, je pense qu'on a un rôle aussi à jouer dans le fait de contrer ces discours de disqualification.
Merci beaucoup, Sarah. Valeria, over to you.
Yes, well, I'm really very happy to hear what Sarah said, and also thanks to Claudia for shedding, light on what our contribution says. I just wanted to add two things. I think I fully agree that the role of the unions nowadays is very important. That is particularly important in these sectors like care, domestic, whatever, which in fact are invisible. Now, going back to the question, Gregory, you posed at the very beginning, I mean, yeah, in fact, you know, the hoping that the unions will be able to raise the working conditions and particularly the wages in this particular sector is very crucial. Because just to give you an example now, Nick before talked about, linking to the paper of Ginny and colleagues, the appealing to consumers. In the care platform, this doesn't work because consumers don't have money. They are actually armed themselves and they go on platform to buy services which are cheap. Just to give an example, I mean, so I was talking with the Claudia this morning, the lady that comes here time to time to clean, she takes Uber taxi because they are actually cheap and she cannot afford to take a normal transport. She doesn't have a car. So these are the conditions under which these workers, then at the end, they end up working for platforms and, or, you know, just doing very strange kind of things in different sectors. So I think it's important that unions really, you know, reinforce their own capacity. This is really crucial, the role of the unions and what they can do today, particularly under the conditions we are facing. So I just wanted to shed light on this. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much, Valeria. Over to you, Agnieszka. We're pulling back to the beginning, and we'll let people know that we're moving towards the end of the webinar with some fantastic contributions. Agnieszka.
Yes, thank you. So I'm impressed by all the suggestions and strategies that came out from the research presented in this volume. What I would like to add is perhaps the overall message of the demands or actions of unions. And what surfaces from my experience and my research in particular on working time is that being clear about objectives. So why is it that the demands are formulated and put forward? That helps to strengthen the message. And what I'm talking about is the business case versus the worker well-being or the worker interest. What I've noticed is that certain leaning towards justifying the demands by saying that also benefits, so achieving better quality of jobs on certain dimensions, that would also benefit businesses. There is an attempt to prove that it's this positive outcome for everyone. There's a win-win if we improve job quality. I mean, that's interesting. That might come from social actors, that might come post hoc as an evaluation of the measures undertaken. But I believe that it helps to achieve better outcomes for workers when the message is clearly formulated. We strive for instance, for working time reduction or for employment contract because that serves workers. That improves their well-being, their experience of work, then they can have better lives, we can form better societies, but it is to improve their conditions of work. It's not to make them perform better, to work more intensely, to be more productive for the employer, because then the matter of then who benefits from more productive workers, no? And that's quite often the employer. We see the financialization of the economy. So the gains are channeled somewhere else, and it's the union's voice that can say, wait a minute, this is the worker that should have a participation in the gains generated. So I would just put this on the table. And my experience for working time reduction policies was indeed they are much weaker when it is based on the business case. And then the productivity, 100% productivity achieved with reduced working time, that just leads to then businesses realizing, okay, if we can squeeze more work, more productivity in shorter time, why should we even employ full-time workers? We can just resort to some zero-hour contracts, mini jobs, or whatever. So it really needs some solid underpinning of well-being and of quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka, and for your participation in this. It really reinforces the link between the CRIMT Partnership project, of which the ETUI is an integral part, and the ongoing research agenda, which is one of the major research agendas being pursued on better work, which is being driven by the ETUI, the European Trade Union Institute. So we're very fortunate that such an institution exists, since it's not evident in many different countries, and it also supports networks like the Trade Union Research Network and other networks. On that, I'd like to emphasize that another one of those networks is the CRIMT Partnership. And at the end of October this year, and we will send the information to everyone, we'll be having a conference on work on the brink, strategies for resilience and making work better. On aura une colloque à la fin du mois d'octobre sur le travail dans tous ses états et on vous enverra le pair la communication. On espère vous voir là, mais l'activité sera intégralement en hybride, donc il est possible de participer à distance également. I don't know whether anyone else wants to come in. I think we're almost at the end here, but a last contribution from anyone, going once, going twice. And I really want to emphasize, Marcus Helfen asked why environmental risk is not included in the risk dimensions in the initial presentation of Dalia and colleagues. I think that they might make the argument that it is, but I think it's an important contribution that it's found in expressivity or expressiveness in the sense of contributing to an environmentally sustainable community, but it's clearly part of health and safety risk or other aspects of risk. There was also someone who raised the question of the relevance of all of the to small and medium-sized enterprises as opposed to large firms, and that's a really important question. And it raises some of the questions asked by Gerhard about the extension of collective agreements and the kind of competition that you're regulating. And someone also pointed to the work done by the Workplace Justice Lab at Rutgers around strategies for dealing with small and medium-sized businesses. And that's very much to pick up on Olga's point, a place-based strategy, because they're very much looking at local employers associations and how to work with them. I think one of the takeaways from this is that there are a lot of allies for better work, and you need to find them. You need to construct the narrative. You need to be able to take it forward. And there's some really useful suggestions that we have here. I think one of the points at the inception of the CRIMT Partnership on experimentation for better work was a frustration with the social science research that it was published and perish, or it was published and move on. So there wasn't enough dialogue between the work being done and talking to each other. And part of the motive behind this kind of webinar, thematic issues, other kinds of activities that you can organize, is to get the research talking to each other. And I think that we saw some of the benefits of this today. Vous avez vu plusieurs des avantages de faire parler les contributions des uns et des autres. So thank you very much to our interpreters. Merci aux interprètes. I want to highlight the absolutely brilliant visual done by our colleague Nicolas Roby with his 3 tarot cards of risk, autonomy, and expressiveness, and how we bring these together. You'll be dealing your tarot deck this evening, but adding lots of other things, and we'll be continuing our thinking about better lives, better societies, better work, and in what order, and how you construct that on the basis of some of the suggestions being made. And I really encourage everyone to go and look at transfer. It has a lot of interesting issues, and in particular, clearly, the thematic issue on making work better, because we think that there are some really dynamic contributions here. And we wish to thank all of the contributors for participating so willingly in this exchange. So thanks to everyone, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.